Good evening. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Raed Hanoun, and it's a pleasure for me today to be with you to discuss the artificial intelligence and how ethics should play a vital role in taking decisions using AI. Basically, I have more than 20 years of experience in the finance industry as a private banker and right now at the World Bank. I also have more than 15 years in the academic industry as university professor and trainer and instructor of professional certificates at Morgan International, basically CFA and CMA programs. We chose this topic because you know right now that every single decision that is taken by our end would involve the artificial intelligence. So if you would like to take a decision related to finance, related to personal factors, if I would like to have a certain feedback, we'll be using the artificial intelligence platforms in order to have an idea or to have an opinion related to the action. However, it's very important to consider the ethical part in artificial intelligence, and in specific when we talk about financial decisions. So, for example, as CFA charter holders or as a portfolio managers, it's very important to consider the artificial intelligence as a platform and to take into consideration the ethical part of this AI. So, in order to make sure that your clients' interests are always coming first, in order to make sure that you're recommending the proper investments to your clients, in order to make sure that you're recommending the initial public offering to your clients fairly, it's very important to make sure that if you're using a platform, an automated platform, this automated platform is considering the ethical part when taking decisions or giving opinions. So this is why it's very important to balance the innovation and responsibility whenever you're talking about artificial intelligence and ethics. And this is basically the importance of this webinar. But before I start, let me discuss the basics. If I want to ask you, what is your understanding of ethics? Yani Qasim, how would you define ethics? What is your understanding of ethical actions, ethical standards? What do you think? If you want to define ethics, Mikhail. Look, dears, basically, if I want to discuss ethics or to define ethics, it's all about what is right and what is wrong. So basically, whenever we're talking about ethical actions or ethical decisions, yani we're trying to tell type what action is correct, what action is incorrect. How would you interact with your clients? How would you treat your subordinates? So it's all about ethical standards. And look what? Those ethical standards might not always be related to laws and rules. So you might have some actions that might be legally accepted but unethical, and vice versa. So it's very important for us to determine what is meant by ethics. It's basically the set of moral principles that would govern our relationship with the others in order to tell, again, what action is correct and what action is incorrect. In order to tell how would we interact with my clients, how would I interact with my subordinates, with my peers, and so on. And here is the question. Do you think that artificial intelligence would be considering all those ethical standards whenever, again, taking decision or giving opinion or giving feedback? What do you think? We as human beings, we're considering those ethical standards. What about the artificial intelligence as a machine learning, for example? Do you think that it will be considering those ethical parts? What do you think? Asbed. We should make sure that the artificial intelligence platform is considering those ethical parts. And in case they are not considered in their decisions, we as human beings, we should consider them. And I should not take, for example, the opinion or the decision or the recommendation of the artificial intelligence as for granted before I consider what might be its ethical implication on our clients, for example, as a portfolio manager, or for example on our subordinates as a supervisor, or on our peers as a normal employee or a manager. So it's very important to consider the ethical part related to the artificial intelligence. Look what, if I want to define the artificial intelligence, it's the ability of a computer or a certain algorithmic platform to take a certain decision on behalf or like a human being using the intelligence of the human being. So basically right now in finance, we have what we call robot advisor. This robotic advisor will be able to gather data and give recommendation to the clients or to the investors about what to include in their portfolio, about what to exclude from their portfolios. So simply, as a human being, I can plug in the data in this robot advisor, and this robot advisor will be analyzing this data and trying to give a recommendation of what to be included in this specific portfolio and what should not be included in another portfolio. But for me as an employee or a human being or a manager or a portfolio manager, I want to make sure that, again, this decision is ethical. Yani for example, it's unethical to prioritize a client over another client. Or for example, to include an IPO in one client's portfolio and excluded from another client's portfolio, just because, for example, of a friendship or personal relationship. I want to treat all my clients fairly. So the question is, if the AI recommends a certain asset or a certain IPO to a client and did not recommend it to the other client, the question is, would you have an explanation of why this AI recommended this IPO to this portfolio or not? If you don't have an explanation, this might breach the ethical standards because you might be asked by your client on why you didn't include this IPO in my portfolio. So if you don't have an answer because it doesn't suit you, for example, or for example, it's not that liquid, or whatever reason, this would be violating the, again, fair dealing with your clients. So my problem here, and if I'm using the artificial intelligence as an only decision-making platform, it might lack the ethical standards. And again, you will not be able to explain why you included or you excluded this asset, this investment, this IPO from the portfolio of a client. So this is why having the AI and ethics in line is very important. Another dilemma related, for example, to data privacy. So basically, whenever you're plugging in the data of your clients in the AI, this might be problematic because this might not be, for example, maintaining the confidentiality of your employees or of your clients' data or information. So this might be problematic. Or even when the AI uses your data in order to, for example, recommend a certain, again, يمكن advertising on YouTube. So again, if you know the YouTube or any other social media platform will be communicating with you through advertising. طب how would they select the advertising that would be communicated to Mikhail, to Raed, to Qasim? This would be based on the cookies that are gathered by this AI in order to tell what are my interests. So basically, if the AI is able to generate data, collect data about my interests, again, this might be unethical if it breaches the privacy or the confidentiality. So again, it's all about integrating the concept of ethics whenever you're using the artificial intelligence. And one of the major CEOs, for example, of a social media platform, 2 or 3 years ago, was giving his testimony in the Congress because of what? Because of a potential breach of data, for example, or the unethical usage of data of the clients or the users. So again, this might be problematic here, and this is why again and again we should always integrate the AI with the ethical standards. So again, the term AI, as we said, it describes how a robotic system, how a computer, a platform would be using, for example, data, would be using experience made by humans in order to give a certain recommendation, in order to give a certain opinion, and in order to take decisions. So this is the artificial intelligence in general. Again, it's very important to know that the ethics plays a vital role in artificial intelligence. And again, whenever you're in possession of data, you should use this data ethically. Whenever you would like to recommend, for example, a certain asset investment or a new initial public offering to your clients, ethical standards should be considered if you're using the artificial intelligence. And accordingly, you should be able to explain why you're taking this action, why you're recommending this investment. Is it based on reasonable basis? Is it based on ethical factors or la because of, for example, personal factors? So again, it's very important to integrate the AI with the ethical standards. Look what, dears, this is the evolution of behavioral ethics. Again, the traditional focus is on what is right and what is wrong. So now basically, based on my ethical standards, I know that this action is right. I can do it. The other action is incorrect. I should not do it. So this is the traditional focus on behavioral or on ethics, to know exactly which action is considered a right action, an ethical action, and which action would be considered unethical action, incorrect action that I should not be doing it. How can I convert this into practice? Only we have what we call the moral judgment. Moral judgment basically, and I would like to tell Tab, look what, if I have a reasonable basis related to a certain action, and I know that I have a client, and this client wants to invest $1 million. If I would like to make this investment, would I choose this investment arbitrarily? Or la, I want to make a certain analysis, a certain assessment. I want to understand what are the needs of the client, what are the constraints of the clients, what is the objective of the client, and. So look what, the moral judgment, it's basically when you take decisions and you're using a reasonable basis. You're independent in taking this decision. So you don't have any influence by anyone that requires you or that force you to use or to include or to recommend this asset or this investment to your client. This is the moral judgment. And I judge that this investment should be recommended, that investment should not be recommended, based, for example, on the investment policy statement. Only as a human being I'm doing that. As artificial intelligence, how can you prove that the decisions taken by this AI is basically relying or complying with the ethical standards? So you might be asked by your client later on as a portfolio manager, for example, no, what is the basis of your decision? If you're only using the AI as a platform, this might be problematic because you might not have the answer. However, you can use the robotic, for example, advisor, and you should put your own input in order to make sure that you're using the moral judgments. So basically, it's very important to integrate again the ethical standards with the AI. For example, me as a university professor, I always urge my students to utilize the artificial intelligence. However, I tell them to use it responsibly. And I mean by the term responsibly, and then I cannot use, for example, an AI platform and basically ask this AI platform to prepare a project or to give me an answer key for an assignment without having my own input. Because what is the added value right now? There is no added value. And how can you confirm that the AI is basically providing you with the, again, correct methodology, answers, feedback, and so on, if you don't put your own input? So it's very important, again, to use this artificial intelligence responsibly, to know how to use it and to know how to benefit from its inputs, again, by adding your own input as well. So this is basically what we technically call the moral judgment. Right now, you know that because of the increased reliance on machines, on platforms, on social media, on artificial intelligence, we should make sure that this AI would provide us with the feedback, with the opinions, with the recommendations maintaining the ethical standards as well. Otherwise, you will not be able to again and again consider this decision or this recommendation by the AI unless you can be pretty sure that this decision is anjad, is really ethically concerned, or otherwise I cannot take it. So any action should be considering the ethical part, even if you're using the artificial intelligence. Look what dears, those are the key principles of behavioral ethics. One, we have what we call the moral awareness, and again, what is right and what is wrong. Two, which is more important, the moral decision making. Tell me, for example, if you have in possession an insider information, and if you've been told by a CEO of a certain company that they will be releasing their financials at the end of the year, and their financials will be by far better than the expectations, the question is, can you use this information to invest in the company or not really? What do you think? So you have in possession a classified info telling you that the firm will be reporting its financials and those financials will be by far better than the expectations. Should you use it or not really? What do you think? Look what there's the clear answer, you should not use it. Why? Because this information is not available to the public. And accordingly, you cannot take advantage of this information since not everyone has it in his portfolio or know it. So again, the moral decision making tells me that look what, even though you have this insider information, you cannot use it because this will be unethical, because you will be taking advantage of using this information, and this would not be ethical within your finance or investment community. Or for example, if you have, for example, a certain report that is initiated, and you knew after initiating this report that there is an error, for example, in a certain model, what would you do? Would you inform the users of this research that there is an error and here is the error, or la, you simply keep it as it? The ethical action, you should be issuing an appendix telling that this research includes an error in this model and this is how you can solve it or this is how you can adjust it. So all those would be related to moral decision making in order to make sure that any decision coincides with the principles. And I know that the principle, I cannot use insider information. The principle, I should inform about an error in my research, for example. So this is called moral decision making. Again, this is at the human beings level. This should be the same at the artificial intelligence level. Otherwise, the entire input of the AI would be irrelevant. Moral decision making. Then we have what we call the moral intent. The moral intent, yani our intentions should be ethical, should be relying to the ethical standards. So whenever you'd like to take a certain decision, your intention should be, this decision to be, again, in compliance with the ethical standards. So now, for example, when I recommend a certain investment to client A and do not recommend it to client B, it should not be because I prioritize or I favor client A over client B. The intention should be because, and I know that client A basically have what it takes to invest in this asset in terms of risk appetite, in terms of capital constraints, in terms of time horizon, and so on. However, client B might not have those factors. So basically, you did not favor A over B. However, your decision, your recommendation was based on, again, ethical standards. And then I know that I cannot recommend it to this client. So it's unethical to recommend it. And if you recommend it, this would be a breach for the ethical standards. So this is called the moral intent. And again, as a portfolio managers later on, if you've been asked by your clients, and why you didn't include this asset in my portfolio, you will have a certain reason why you didn't include it. But if you're simply using the AI, okay, you might not have the answer, and this might be problematic. And all these would result in moral actions. So any action that you will be taking, this would be in line with your intentions. Well, again, your intentions from the beginning, they should be in line with the ethical standards. The entire issue, the moral awareness, decision making, intent, and action should be embedded in the AI. So basically, if you're using a robotic advice and you're not pretty sure that this robotic advisor embeds in its decision those behavioral ethical standards, you should be including them. You should be adjusting the decision or the recommendation given by the AI in order to, again, be in line with the ethical standards. And I believe, that the artificial intelligence, it's a learning machine. And basically, it learns from its, again, recommendations, opinions, from their interaction with the human beings. At a certain stage, we might have a certain AI that provide us with a decision that is, again, 100% in line with the ethical standards. Look at those two categories of ethics, the consequential versus the non-consequential ethical standards. What do you think? Ends justify means or means justify ends? What do you think? And if you'd like to reach a certain goal, if you'd like to accomplish a certain task, if you would like to generate a certain return, would you do anything to generate this return or not? Whatever actions you should be taking, it should be in line with the ethical laws, rules, and regulations. So do you think that ends justify means or not really? This is an ethical dilemma, by the way. What do you think? Look what dears. If you're using, for example, the Machiavellianism standard, Machiavelli says, look what, do whatever it takes in order to reach your objective. However, this is unethical. Lano, basically, the tools that you might be using in order to achieve your objective might not be ethical. So I should not use it. So basically, it's not always the case that ends justify means. I would like to look at the means. Are they ethical or not? So you should never ever act unethically and simply tell that, look what, I want to accomplish this objective. I want to generate a high return to my client. Okay, you should do that, but you should be using ethical standards, ethical tools. So whenever we're talking about the consequential ethics, this would tell you that, look what, the result guides the decision. So basically, whenever you're talking about a result, you will do whatever it takes in order to reach it. So therefore, anything that reaches a good result is deemed acceptable. This is called the utilitarianism or the Machiavellianism. However, in reality, it might not be the case. You might have a good cause, you might have a good intention, but the means that you're using are unethical. For example, if you know that one of your clients is in need, for example, for a certain help or a certain aid, shall you inform any other person about the need of your client and your intention is to help this client? And I know that my client is in need for this help. And I disclose this information to another person, a third entity or a third party, telling that this client is in need for 1, 2, and 3. Your intention and you want to help this client. So again, do you think that this is ethical? Are you allowed to disclose this information to a third party without taking the consent of your client? You have a good cause, you have a good objective. However, simply informing or communicating this information to a third party without taking the consent of your client, this might be problematic. This will be unethical. So, Hon, I cannot tell that my cause is a good cause, but your means, your tools are not ethical. So the answer is no. You cannot disclose this information to the third party unless you take the consent of your client. So this is basically called the consequential ethics. Whenever you say that the result guides the decision, you can do anything in order to reach your result, which is again unethical if the tools are unethical. So this is why we have what we call the non-sequential ethics. This non-consequential ethics state that the results are merely outcomes, but people make decisions and take action based on what they believe is true, on what they value. So again, the same situation. You know that your client is in need for a certain help. You cannot disclose or discuss this information with anyone unless you take the consent of your client. So this is called the deontology. Yani again, I want to look for good means in order to reach good objectives or results. This is at our level, a human beings level. What about the AI? The AI might not be able to identify in this scenario whether it's ethical or unethical to take this information and disclose it in order to help this client. So this might be problematic. So this is why it's always a must to integrate ethics in the artificial intelligence. So this is what we call the non-consequential ethics. You cannot do whatever it takes in order to reach your objective, even though your objective might be a good one, a good cause. You want to help this client. So again, consequential ethics versus non-consequential ethics. Look what dears. Some ethical issues in AI starts with the privacy and surveillance. So again, for example, and I'm using the social media, basically the artificial intelligence will be recording all my, again, cookies or actions or my pages that I visit in order later on to utilize this information, to utilize this data so that they can, for example, communicate with me irrelevant advertising. And this is how it works basically. The advertising that you see in your social media, they are directed to you based on your preferences, based on your interests. طب how would an artificial intelligence know about your preferences? Because they are logging in your browsing history, for example, which is technically called cookies. And this might be problematic. So that in the States, in Europe, it's not allowed to have, again, an AI recording the data of the clients or the users of social media platforms without taking their consents. So this is why whenever you browse a certain, again, website or installing a new application, the first question that they ask you, do you have the consent or do you give us the consent to use your data, your cookies, in order to make your life or your browsing history easier or not? They should take your consent. Moreover, once they take your consent, those information, this data should be utilized ethically. And it could not be sold, for example, to a third party. It should never ever be sold to a third party without taking your consent, for example. So again, privacy and surveillance is an ethical issue. Again, surveillance, and basically right now, if you're using your credit card, the bank will be able to tell where are you right now, what did you consume, what did you purchase, and so on. So basically, we are under surveillance by using, for example, the credit card or using your mobile phone. They know exactly where are you right now, what are you doing, and so on. So the question is, those artificial intelligence platforms, are they using those data responsibly or not? If not, this might be problematic. Another ethical issue, for example, related to the AI, the automation and employment. Some researchers says that, okay, you might have many employments or many tasks in the coming few years that will not be held by human beings, that will be held, for example, by employees or by artificial intelligence. So now we have an ethical dilemma. And is it a good idea to substitute this employee with a robot or with AI, since the AI can perform this task and come in more efficiently? This is an ethical dilemma. Is it ethical to, again, replace this employee with a robot? It's ethical dilemma. For example, my own interpretation, yes. If you're able, for example, to replace this employee with AI and use the employee to perform tasks that the AI cannot perform, this would be amazing. So now I should train, for example, the employee to perform more advanced tasks so that the tasks that can be performed by a robot, by a machine, okay, and I can perform it using the AI. So again, this is under the ethical dilemma related to AI. The automation of some, for example, financial tasks, again, using a robotic advisor to manage, for example, the portfolio of a client. Again, how much does this robot advisor behave ethically or consider the ethical standards when recommending, for example, a certain asset or a certain IPO or a certain investment? This is again an ethical dilemma. So till now, there is a certain or some, let's say, ethical issues in AI, the development of the AI and the deployment of the AI. So it's very important for us again and again to integrate, this is the key term, the ethical factors whenever you're using artificial intelligence. Look what dears, even the AI could influence the human behavior. The presence of machines in daily life has increased rapidly. Everyone, every single person right now, at least, has its own mobile phone, smartphone, and accordingly will be using some AI platforms as well. DeepSeek, ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, for example. So basically, it's part of our lives right now. Every single person will be using the AI at least for opinions, feedback, and at most for taking decisions. So basically, I should know how would I use this AI responsibly. Again, and I'm not against using the AI, for example, in performing tasks. But are you using this AI responsibly? Are you making sure that the feedback, the input, the opinion that is generated by this AI, is it 100% in line with the ethical standards or not really? So basically, where humans use to directly operate machines to perform tasks, humans right now rely on machines to accomplish tasks indirectly or even without human direction. So basically, right now, most of the times we rely on machines, we rely on AI. Even in the finance industry, again, we have the artificial intelligence advisor, for example, that will be able to create a full portfolio for your clients from A to Z, to recommend the assets constituents for your clients from A to Z, to tell this IPO should be directed to this client and not to that client. This would be done entirely using the AI. However, shall we till now rely only on AI? Not really. I want to consider again the ethical parts. Look, some examples of AI products, and for me, I really care about this one, the automated financial investing. This automated financial investing right now is basically taking actions instead of having a portfolio manager that is taking actions. This automated financial investing can give financial investment assets recommendation to the clients instead of having one single employee portfolio manager or even advisor or analyst making this recommendation. Simply plugging in the data in this platform, the data about your clients in terms of his investment horizon, his capital level, risk appetite, constraints, and so on. And plugging in the data related to the available assets and investments, the AI, through the automated financial investing, can recommend a certain portfolio for your clients. And again, if this portfolio do not rely or do not consider the ethical part, you as portfolio managers or advisors or analysts, you should consider it as well. Because simply relying on the AI without accounting for the ethical part, this might be problematic. I believe that later on we can include the ethical factor in the AI decision so that you can have the AI decision from A to Z complete if you are able to consider the ethical part. Within this automated financial investing, I want to make sure that the data that I include or that I plug in using this AI about my clients to always remain confidential. I cannot sacrifice or I cannot put the information of my clients at risk. So come on, I would like to consider this as well. I want to make sure that the data is 100% private, confidential, is not subject to any leakage. Social media monitoring, again, as I told you, whenever you're using the social media, the AI is able to discover your interests based on your browsing history using cookies. And accordingly, will be able to use this data in order to provide you with a customized advertising. So this is why then I receive an advertisement and another person that is in front of me will not be receiving the same one using the same platform. Why? Because the AI knows that my interests are not the same as the one in front of me. So this might be again monitoring, and again this will raise ethical questions. Is it ethical to use this data to again create a certain customized advertisement or not really? So all those are examples related to the AI and the human behavior. And again, those would be raising questions about, for example, data privacy. Here, I go to what we call the datafication of everyday life. Yani, the data privacy. I think a few months ago in France, one of the big companies was subject to a certain fine of 150 million euros because of one single problem, the data privacy. They believed in France that this specific company, it's an online company, online business company, is not maintaining the confidentiality of information of its clients properly. Basically, they are using the client's information or the client's cookies or the client's data irresponsibly. They were forcing the clients to use their platforms to click on the consent on using their data. So I don't have any other option. If you want to use this application, I should click, yes, I agree that this application uses my data for example, advertising purposes or whatever. So the company cannot say that, look what, and I took the consent of the clients. Doesn't work like that, because until you force the client to give them your consent. So again, this is under what we call the datafication. So whenever you're talking about datafication, you're talking about the big data, the massive amount of data that might be available in the artificial intelligence servers, databases, and how this data is utilized. So again, this data, if it's utilized responsibly, this would be okay. However, if you're selling the data or using it for reasons that do not benefit the client or the concerned person, this might be problematic. So this is why most people are unaware of the extent to which their data is available and how it's actually used. And at a personal level, I'm not aware of this. I don't know. I'm using the social media platforms. I'm using, for example, the browsing engines. So I cannot confirm how the data, how the cookies, how my browsing history is utilized, and basically how much of this data is available at the AI level or the service level or databases. This is problematic, and this would akid raise a certain ethical concern. Well, it is an ethical concern. People often assume that machines have superior information, and this is basically because they have huge level of data. And the question is again, this data, is it utilized ethically or not? This is a very important factor. If you're using it ethically, this would be okay. Unethical, this might be problematic. Look, dears, whenever you're talking about the challenges again, when you're using AI, the ethical challenges. First of all, the fairness. Again, I have two clients. I ask the machine learning or the robot advisor to recommend this IPO to those clients, and I only get out with one recommendation to one client. If I don't know why this would be only attributed to client A, this might be breaching the fairness. And I know that, for example, the CFA Institute, in its code of ethics, one of its standards related to the fair dealing with the clients. So if you're not able to confirm why this client was selected and the other was not, this might be, again, breaching the fairness. Two, accountability. طب look what, Qasim, if the AI is taking a decision, who will be accountable? You or the AI? Basically, the AI will never be accountable. It's an AI at the end of the day. You are accountable in all cases. For example, as a portfolio manager, then I'm using the AI for recommendation purposes, and I should know that, look what, if anything goes wrong, the AI will not be accountable. You are accountable. You're the portfolio manager. So this is why you should be using the AI responsibly. Then you're accountable at the end of the day. You're taking the decisions. Accountability. Transparency, it's a challenge. Again, if you're not able to confirm, for example, how the data is utilized, how the data is collected, this would be in breach with the transparency. It will not be transparent anymore. So transparency, again, is an ethical challenge in AI because you might not be able to confirm how did you generate the data? How did you use the data? So you might be in breach of transparency. Well, again, all those would be affecting the ethical standards. Yani ethics is an ethical challenge in AI because again, if you're not able to embed, integrate the ethical actions in the AI platform, you will not be able to again and again use this AI properly. Otherwise, this might be problematic, as we said. So it's very important to know that those are major challenges if you're talking about AR, artificial intelligence. Rights of privacy in big data. Again, privacy is a must. As, for example, a social media platform, and I have information, data about the users, about the subscribers, it's very important that this information, that this data should be private. Yani, for example, you cannot sell this information to companies so that they can create advertising campaigns according to the data on hand. Why? Because this would be breaching the privacy factor. So it's very important to ensure that if the data is collected, this data should be collected after the consent of the users, and this data should be utilized responsibly. Moreover, this data should always be private, should always be secured. It cannot be sold. So this is why it's very important to know that privacy is a key. Again, there are legislations that maintain the privacy of the big data. You're not allowed as, for example, a social media platform or AI platform to utilize the data of your clients, of your subscribers without taking their consent. Privacy of big data. Again, using the credit card, for example, for credit cards, they use the AI in order to discover or to tell if there is any improper usage of this credit card. So, for example, then I'm using the credit card for the previous 5 years, and I never used it, for example, outside my home country. And suddenly, this credit card was utilized outside the home country. So when the AI will be raising a red flag, look what, something improper or not normal is taking place. And this is the first time that the credit card is utilized outside the home country. So this would be a red flag. They will be asking you to authorize or to confirm if you're doing this transaction. From this aspect, this is very important. the AI was able to benefit the client to confirm that you are the person who's doing this transaction. On the other hand, the AI or the bank in this example has now information about your location. They know that you are not in your home country right now and you are in X country, for example. So the question is, this information, should it be communicated to anyone else, to a third party? The clear answer is no. So this is called rights of privacy in big data. It's always a must to maintain this big data in private, to not be disclosed to any third party, again, unless you have the consent of your clients or of the users. So this is why how consent plays a role in ethical data gathering. Again, all social media platforms, AI, and so on, they will be asking you to give the consent on using cookies, for example, to give permission for usage of the data in a specified manner. This is amazing. However, this should not be the only option. يعني أنا basically if I download a certain application, they ask me about, for example, whether I agree, or they ask me to agree on using the data. So if I don't agree, I cannot download or I cannot use this application. So this would be violating the consent procedures. Now basically they are pushing you, they are forcing you to accept it. And this is what really happened in France. Again, as I told you, when they find this big company for 150 million euros, should give the option to the client to whether accept or to not accept to have this data utilized. So consent plays a very important role in ethical AI data gathering. So basically, data privacy is the first step toward ensuring ethical practices. And again, taking the consent of your clients or the users in using their data is a very important one, because without their consent, you should not use their data. So data privacy is a key. Data gathering is a key. How to gather the data after taking their consent. How to use the information. To use this information properly in a specified manner that is communicated to your clients or users. Otherwise, you should decline consent. So owners of data, we as users, the owners of data should be able to opt into or opt out of providing their data by being clearly asked to provide consent or to decline consent. So now I should have those two options. I can either accept sharing my data, which is okay, it's your right, or decline sharing your data, which is your right. With one additional step, and you should be granted this usage of the platform, application, or whatever, if you accept or do not accept using the data or let them using the data. So all those are basically ethical challenges in AI, in specific on how to gather data and how to utilize this data. This is extremely important. So as you notice, dears, right now the AI plays a vital role in our daily activities. It allows us, or it helps us in taking decisions and giving recommendations, and for example, constructing even portfolios and so on. So I want to make sure that the input of the AI considers the ethical standards. And if not, I want to take this input and make sure that Anna, as a user of this input, as a decision maker, portfolio manager, include the ethical standards and the AI input. Otherwise, this might be problematic, and this is the current challenge right now in how to include the ethical standards and the artificial intelligence, which is a very important one. So this is basically related to the artificial intelligence and ethical standards. And right now, you know that the human beings are able to identify clearly what is ethical and what is unethical, what is right and what is wrong, and that ends should never justify means. And I want to make sure that when I'm using the artificial intelligence, In finance or non-finance activities, I want to make sure that again, this artificial intelligence would include the ethical standards in its inputs. Otherwise, this will be challenging. This will be problematic. What do you think, dears? Any questions? Any inquiries? Perfect. So basically, this is the seminar related to, or the session related to artificial intelligence. Looking forward to seeing you in other seminars.